Welcome, everybody. Glad you joined us here for this session with Noora Sharrab on how to integrate the UN SDGs into your enterprise. We're really glad you're here. And for those of you that are listening after the event, glad you've tuned in. So just to start off, I wanted to just do a land acknowledgement. We would like to acknowledge that the land on which we gather has been and still is the traditional territory of several Indigenous nations, including the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Wendat, the Métis, and the Mississaugas of the First Credit Nation. Since time immemorial, numerous Indigenous nations and Indigenous peoples have lived and passed through this territory. We recognize that this territory is covered with the Dish with One Spoon Treaty and the Two-Row Wampum Treaty, which emphasizes the importance of joint stewardship, peace, and respectful relationships. Sheridan and Edge affirm that it is our collective responsibility to honor and respect those who have gone before us, those who are here, and those who have yet to come. We are grateful for the opportunity to be working and living on this land. So before we jump into this session, I just want to talk a little bit about what EDGE is. And Junior, I know you're coming in from Zimbabwe. Fayaz, where are you coming in from?
Hey, so I'm actually a University of Toronto Mississauga student.
Oh, okay, awesome. So you're
And I
in
found out
through
about
iCube?
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome.
So I found out about it through iCube and as well as the entrepreneurship hatchery at UTM.
Awesome. Okay, great. We're glad you're here. So for those of you who do not know, EDGE is an incubator program where we operate out of Sheridan College, and we focus on offering learning programs, mentorship, co-working space, and access to funding for impact entrepreneurs. So that is people who are building social enterprises, purpose-driven businesses, or not-for-profits. And since we started about 3 years ago, we have helped over 300 founders, 255 ventures, 300 founders build 255 ventures. We've created 653 jobs. We have had about 11,000 participants in our programs. And out of the ventures that are in our program, about 73% rate themselves as social enterprises. And 80% are led by underrepresented founders. So we're a pretty diverse group doing some pretty cool things. So every 2 Mondays, every second Monday, we have a program called Mentor Mondays, which is where we bring someone in to talk to different ventures about what they do and how they work. And I'm really excited to have Noora here. Noora Sharrab obtained her master's degree in political science with a specialization in refugee and forced migration studies at York University in Toronto. She co-founded an NGO in 2009 called Hopes for Women in Education to provide higher education scholarships, skills training, and online language development in the process to refugee and displaced women in Jordan. She worked for several years with the United Nations agencies in Jordan, focusing on education, international development, and relief services. Her active role working with the refugee communities in Jordan pushed her towards fundraising and building a women's center in the Gaza refugee camp in Jordan, which currently employs over 34 full-time refugee women and men with disabilities and has trained and worked with over hundreds of refugees and served over 1,000 refugees locally in the process. In 2013, Noora partnered with Jacqueline Sophia to establish a social enterprise, City, with the purpose to empower refugee communities to become self-reliant through employment and to help enhance their opportunity to become financially independent and self-sustainable. In May 2021, City launched City Box, which is the first ever subscription box dedicated to creating long-term sustainability to refugee communities through theme-based quarterly boxes for conscious consumers. Noora is an advisory council with with UNHCR Canada and an advisory council member with We Connect International Canada. She's also an Ellen Altitude participant and most recently a Canadian CEO Venture winner. And she received the Muslim Awards of Excellence for Women of the Year 2021 award. And we're also pretty proud to say that she is also a mentor at Edge, and works with our RISE program participants, and more recently with our RBC Social Impact Catalyst program. So really excited to have you here, Noora.
It's such a pleasure. I'm really excited to kind of go into more detail around UN SDG goals. We hear about UN SDG goals a lot. People are often familiar with like the colorful icons that they see around UN SDG goals. And what I'd like to do today, hopefully, is dig a little deeper about like, what does it really mean? Does it even matter? You know, we see it a lot, but I'd love to take this opportunity to create an interactive session where you can also use this as an opportunity to ask questions and ask about your own ventures if you have one, to see, does it align? I'm hoping as well that this session is an opportunity for you not to just ask questions, but use this with others in the room to also kind of gauge around, especially if you have questions around like, where does my venture fall into around which SDG goal, which indicator are we covering, etc. So we'll kind of dive in a little deeper.
So glad. This is going to be great. Can you had some slides you wanted to share?
I did. I just want access to sharing my screen.
Oh, apology.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay, fantastic. So, alrighty, let me know if you can see that.
Yep.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so Lisa already gave a wonderful overview. My name is Noora Sharrab. I'm a Palestinian Canadian. Also a mother of three that's also going a little crazy with this lockdown happening here in Ontario, but I'm sure a lot of people can relate, and really looking forward to connecting with everybody. So before I dive into SDG goals, I wanted to bring forth this Japanese concept called ikigai, which means a reason for being. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because before starting my social enterprise or before starting my nonprofit, there was always this question around, you know, not just working for the sake of working with no purpose and no goal, but also trying to kind of find a reason for why we do what we do and how we all are kind of interconnected in this global community that we live in. So I want you to take a moment to look at these 4 circles. One that touches on what you love, your passion and mission around there, what the world needs, you know, the mission around, you know, some of the key things that the world is in need, the vocations around it, what you can be paid for. So that's usually around the skill sets that you obtain, or the things that you're able to contribute through whether the skill sets, the products, or the services that we can offer. And then what you're good at, how we can kind of bring that in. And the reason I wanted to start with this is because when, particularly for people that start social enterprises, they're usually doing it with this means of something that they're passionate about. They believe in a particular mission. It's creating this force within them to really drive an effect for creating positive impact. So it could be that it's around no poverty, it could be around creating sustainability in communities, or it could be our impact on the environment and the world that we want to leave behind for our children. And so it's about digging a little deeper from, you know, not just a product that I'm bringing to market, but like, what impact am I having? How is this really creating that footprint? What kind of footprints am I leaving behind as a result? So I know there's a few people. I'm going to try to like, I'm going to try to connect a little bit on the chat as well if you guys want to put in. But I want you to quickly just put in the chat, if you can, what is something that you guys are really passionate about? What is an issue or a topic that is a driving force for you when it comes to, it could be the things related to climate change. It could be about reducing your carbon footprint. It could be around reducing gender inequality. So I just want to hear from you before we continue. You can feel free to jot it down in the chat. Poverty reduction, affordable housing. I love that. Entrepreneurship as possible solution for poverty. Yes. Okay, great. So sometimes we look at some of the world's biggest problems and we say, okay, where do I fit in? Where does my business fit in? Water inequality, that's a big one. And it's important to also see where are we in the world with some of these biggest problems, right? Where do we fit in? How can I, as one person, really make an impact in reducing, water inequality globally? Where do we fit in? And that's kind of around the idea of how social enterprises running as businesses can do good, but also do, you can make profit, but also do good at the same time. And how that aligns with each other by setting goals from, your corporate structure to try to attain those. Okay. So what are UN SDG goals? So the UN SDG development goals, or SDG, are the world's plan to establish peace and prosperity for all people and the planet. So some of them, as some of you had mentioned, include eradicating hunger, poverty, unemployment, creating equal access to quality education, healthcare, gender equality, mitigating climate change by protecting the environment, etc. And initially, when they were looking at indicators, they were well over, I think it was close to 1,000 indicators that were brought forth by the United Nations. And then the indicators were reduced to 247. And so what do I mean by indicators? And we'll dive in a little deeper in a second. Oh. So here are the common 17 SDG goals that you might be familiar with. And some of you already mentioned them. So no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being. And quickly by looking at this, you can feel that, okay, well, some of them can also cross-link. If we hopefully reduce poverty, that could impact essentially maybe zero hunger. Also, if we're reducing no poverty, that also could have a link towards decent work and economic growth. So sometimes these SDG goals, just by looking at them at the periphery, can feel like, okay, well, if I impact one, I'm definitely going to have an impact on the one right next to it, potentially. And the idea is when we look at SDG goals, these are the main kind of overarching goal that we look at, but then we kind of dig deeper into the indicators that run under those goals. I'll share my screen beyond this presentation in a second, but I took an opportunity to dive a little deeper into one particular goal. So I said, okay, let's pick gender equality as an example, and gender equality is goal 5, which is achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. So I took the first 2 indicators, which are basically the goals within the goal. So it's kind of like, okay, what does that really mean? Let's kind of go a little deeper. And so all this information, what I'll do as well is I'll share a link in the chat as well to where you can access this. These are really, really easy to access beyond the major 17 goals. There are opportunities to dive deeper into reports about, okay, what indicators are under each goal? And the reason we want to know what these indicators are is because it helps you as potentially as a social enterprise or a business or a nonprofit to try to figure out whether you fit within attaining or reaching certain goals as a company that you can try to work towards. Okay, so if you are saying, you know what, my goal as a business is to help reduce, help enhance gender equality, and as such, let's kind of dig deeper into that. So we have our overarching goal, and then we have our sub goals. So 5.1 is the sub goal. So end all forms of discrimination against all women and girls everywhere. So then that's one of the goals, but under it, so how do we do that? Right? So it kind of runs in line of the indicator. So how do we know if we're achieving this particular sub goal of goal 5 or 5.1? We look at whether or not, so this is the indicator around this particular sub goal, which is whether or not legal, framework are in place to promote, enforce, and monitor equality and non-discrimination on the basis of sex. So this is, if you look at it from this structure, you feel like, all right, this is something that's probably able to be achieved more on a policy level, potentially on a government level, that you may or may not be able to contribute as a result in your company. Or you could enforce particular legal frameworks in your company to ensure that there are no forms of discrimination as a result of your day-to-day operations as a company. There is no discrimination on the basis of sex when you're employing your potentially your employees. When you're working with communities, you're enforcing and monitoring equality on that basis. Okay, so let's look at the second kind of sub-goal. So the second sub-goal of goal 5 would be eliminate all forms of violence against all women and girls in public and private spheres, including trafficking and sexual and other types of exploitation. And then you go to the indicators around under that sub-goal and saying, all right, how do we know that we've achieved that particular goal? And then again, it goes into it. I'm not going to read it all, but what I'm trying to get at here is I want you to kind of dive deeper of saying, when we're looking at an overarching goal, and I'll go back here for a second, when we're looking at an overarching goal around no poverty or zero hunger or the likes, it's very important to also dig deeper around what indicators fall under each of those goals to see whether your business are aligned or able to achieve some of those sub goals within that goal. Does that make sense? Am I losing anybody? I just want to make sure. Right? I just want to check the chat if there's anything, just in case. Okay.
I think it looks like everybody's okay. We've been getting thumbs up.
All right. No, I just want to make sure I'm not losing anybody. So this is just an idea. I also wanted to quickly bring forth that, and this was something, we're not diving too deep into this today, but when COVID hit, what has happened as well is a lot of the SDG goals, which were slowly, steadily kind of improving. And the goal just to set in place was to achieve these particular goal sets by 2030. We're in 2022, so we're 8 years away from achieving some of these goals, but also feels like, oh my God, do we have enough time to achieve some of these overarching significant goals that were set globally on a standard? And what's happened is when COVID hit, many of these goals were actually retracted and a lot of them went backwards. So instead of even like, some of them were working towards, improvements year to year, some of them end up becoming worse to, before they were even set in place, in what was it, 2007 is when they were set. So this, since we're diving a little deeper around gender equality, we can see that lockdowns or COVID-19 implications, and considering that we're in a lockdown right now in Ontario with the rising numbers, have actually negatively impacted gender equality as a result through physical, sexual, and psychological impacts that has increased by 30% in some countries. So it's very interesting because what will happen is year to year, there are indications around where are we at in this, role that we're in. I talked to a lot of ventures, for example, and I wanted to bring this as an example. I was recently mentoring a particular venture, and they came in and they were like, you know what, they were a clean tech company. It's a new clean tech company. I won't mention their names, but basically they came and they said, we really want to align, we want to be an impact focused company. And they came and they had this presentation pitch around their company, and they listed like 13 different goals out of the 17. They said, we think we align with all of these. And I was like, wow, that's really ambitious. And the problem with that, I say, is they're spreading themselves too thin, one. And two is, aside from setting goals as a company, you have to ask yourselves, how are we measuring how your company is going to achieve, whether they're working towards achieving that particular goal? And because each goal, as we mentioned before, each goal, as we mentioned before, usually has a sub goal or an indicator to associate whether you're achieving that goal or not, right? So it's ensuring that if you're going to set as a goal for yourself, 13 different UN SDG goals that you want to achieve, it's going to say, all right, well, under each one of these goals, there's going to be several indicators under them, and you're going to have to create measurements under each one to say, all right, am I closer to achieving that or not? Right? So that's something
so really they're better to focus.
100%. So I think it's what's important there is what I did with the venture. I said, okay, let's take a step back and say, where do you have direct impact towards these goals? Because what happens is you can say, well, by starting this company, we're going to be creating jobs. And by creating jobs, we're hitting SDG 8. So decent work and economic growth. But by doing that, I'm also reducing poverty, because by reducing poverty, I'm creating jobs, hence reducing poverty. And then by doing that, I'm also having impact on good health and well-being. And then by doing that, I'm also having peace and justice and strong institutions, because I'm promoting, et cetera, et cetera. So my question to the ventures was, all right, why don't you look at your direct impact as an organization or venture, and how the service or the product that you're bringing to market has a direct implication, not just to the goal, but also to the indicators that will tell you as an organization whether you're working towards those particular goals, right? Yeah, okay. So
I think it's like anything, what you focus on is what you do well.
Yeah. And I think it's important because you, as a new venture, we don't want to be overwhelming ourselves with metrics that may not necessarily make sense for you as a company. So when you think of a clean tech company, you want to say, all right, what are some things that are at the core of what I do? When we dug deeper with the company, we found that at the core of their mission was really about reducing carbon footprint. And we said, all right, is it really no poverty that you're trying to do? Not necessarily. What you're trying to do is you're going to have a direct implication around climate action. By reducing carbon footprint on the long term with your target audience or with your consumers, what you're saying is by supporting our business, you also have a direct association with, let's say, SDG 13 around climate change, or potentially around responsible consumption and production, where if we have a better understanding of our personal and household carbon footprint. Because we were having this conversation, and I was kind of shocked. I was like, oh, I don't even know what my carbon footprint is. I don't know what the average life cycle. And so if a company was to come into play and say, you know what, by using our service or product, we're able to reduce your carbon footprint by 50%. That's something where we're like, oh, wow, fantastic. And similar to when we look at companies like Tesla, where their major marketing was all around reducing our carbon footprint at the end of the day by driving electric cars. And companies will drive their messaging around a particular goal that company is trying to set, and how you align as a consumer by purchasing or consuming that product towards also aligning to that goal. And that's why when we're talking about SDG goals, it's really important not just to reference really cute icons, in your email or in your marketing material, but also continue on with that marketing and storytelling of saying, okay, if now we know that it's climate action that we're trying to achieve, how do we continue that messaging across in our marketing materials, in the products we bring forward, and the metrics that we're measuring, and how we create that link with our consumer as a result. So that's something I want to ask you, and maybe now pose a question to the audience of saying, all right, when we look at our companies, it's also looking at how you align your goals that fit well. I would challenge you to say that you don't build a company around the goals necessarily, but see how the goals align to your company. So you're not necessarily, and you could work backwards, but it makes more sense where if you're running a company or running a service, or you're producing a product, you kind of say, okay, where do I fit within these goals? Sometimes people work backwards of saying, you know what, I want to reduce inequality. How can I do that? Then they build their venture backwards. And that's possible, but that can sometimes create difficulties for you to really create a structure around the problem that you're bringing forth. Okay, so I'm going to go a little forward.
Can we just pause there for 1 second?
Sure. Yes.
Is there any questions at this point? Fayaz, Junior, Stephanie, Joanna, this is a good time to jump in.
Not particularly a question, but I guess essentially what you're saying is niche down to the sub niches, essentially within the UN SDGs, right? Because when there's several UN SDGs, at first it looks like you can solve multiple of them at once,
100%.
and it looks like that from a standpoint. But once you get into the nitty gritty of one, they unfortunately do not align with another one. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. Essentially, what you want to do is you want to dive deeper into each indicator of the UN SDG goal, where it's not just, oh, this is what I'm doing to promote it. You have to ask yourself within your venture. So I would ask you, Fayez, do you have a business? Do you have a running business? I'm not sure if you do.
Right now I'm a student. I'm actually going to be applying to the hatchery this year with something that's in medtech.
Okay.
It's not particularly a social venture, but I just, that's something that I have in mind for the future. In regards to UN SDG 6, clean water and sanitation is something that I want to pursue. But, at first, it's funny that you say this because it kind of blew apart my notion of what I thought could be possible with the social venture, right? And it makes total sense too, because at first you're like, I'm going to solve a bunch of these things at once. But realistically, it's really hard to progress fast and get a product to market fast when there's no specific product market fit, essentially. And that's focusing and niching down in that one goal, right? Or two goals.
So I'm going to do something. I'm going to share my screen again with something else, if possible. I'm going to show you, this is straight from it's an SDG tracker. Do you see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay. So we talked about, you said clean water and sanitation, right?
Yeah, sure.
So and I can put this link in the chat if you'd like. But basically what you can do, and this is a good exercise that you can run for yourselves. Like, okay, so this is an indicator, this is a goal that I think would align well with my social venture. Let me see if the indicators align with maybe my day-to-day practices as a business or the service or offering that we have on the table. So I would go to clean water and sanitation. So I'm clicking on it. And here it dives a little bit in more detail of like, what does that mean? So here it explains clean water is a basic human right, human need, and when that should be easily accessible to all, etc. And then it goes, okay, how there's something where it actually shows you the UN has identified 8 targets and 11 indicators for SDG 6. Targets specify the goals and indicators represent the metrics by which the world aims to track whether these targets are achieved. You can also see where we are in the world today when it comes to actual clean water and sanitation. What are the stats tell us about where we're at, right?
Yeah.
So then you kind of dive a little deeper. All right, so there's safe and affordable drinking water. What does that mean? It means achieve universal and equitable access to safe and affordable drinking water to all. And then under that, you'll see charts around where the world is today, and then indicators around what that means. So it kind of goes into a little more detail. So what I would tell you is to dive a little deeper around where that makes sense for you. As well, you'll see reporting, and I want us to make sure I'm finding the document. Okay, here is one. Can you see my screen? Can you still see a document that I just shared?
Yeah. PDF, okay. Yeah.
So there's also year-to-year reports that are published by the UN that will dive again a little deeper around particularly adjusted goals. And what that means is sometimes what the UN will do is they'll publish adjustments to initial goals that were set to see if it's closer or aligned, or there may be some edits, if you want to call it.
Yeah.
So we can dive into, we'll scroll down. So we go accessibility to water. So you'll see here are the goals and the targets on the one side, but then you'll see the indicators associated to those goals on the other side. And what that tells you is, all right, when we're looking at by 2030, achieve universal and equitable access to safe and affordable drinking water to all, where does that align? So it means the indicator to see whether we're achieving that particular goal is proportion of population using safely managed drinking water services. Okay. And so what does that mean? We dig a little deeper where it's, if I'm working in a particular community, I have to look at what those stats look like at that level. So if your target is to work with a country in South Asia, and you are specifically working with a particular community of creating accessibility to water, you would look at proportion of population using safely managed drinking water services. You would track where you're at today and where goal you're trying to achieve by 2030, and how your company or your venture or your service or your technology is helping achieve those goals through specific impact measurements that you can set in place as a company around those goals and indicators.
I see. Okay.
Does it make sense?
Yeah, that was amazing.
Did I lose you?
No, that was perfect. That was perfect. Essentially, in the timeline of getting up to 2030, for example, let's just use 2030 as the date that we solve these problems.
Your set goal, exactly.
Yeah. And you're positioned as a company with that in mind, along with your indicator like 6.1.1, and further going deeper into that as well. But everything that you're measuring, like the metrics as a company, your operations as a company, and the goals and the missions of the company are kind of aligned towards getting there, right?
Because when we talk about measurement, sometimes we understand measurement as, your analytics. It's easy to think of measurement when you're talking about number of sales you've made, number of customers you've gained, number of products sold, etc. But when we're looking at impact measurement, you're talking about, all right, if I have a particular impact I'm looking to achieve, how am I measuring whether I'm working towards it to the better or negatively walking backwards?
Yeah.
So if a company is setting goals around decreasing their carbon footprint or reducing the number of plastic they're using, are they doing anything to do that? Are they just setting goals for themselves as a company without creating actual
long-lasting change? Yeah,
exactly. So when big companies like Walmart, that's like, okay, we're going to eliminate the use of plastic by X date. So what are they doing to achieve that? Are they implementing practices at the store consumer level to help their customers move away from plastic? Are they enforcing certain rules and restrictions on the vendors that they work with to deliver things plastic free? Are they working as a company to enforce certain day-to-day operations to recycle potentially, et cetera, et cetera? So when you look at it from a particular goal set, it's really about, all right, how are we not just setting big goals, but digging deeper about what's under that goal, and how do we know if we've achieved it or not?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
No, of course. Is there anybody else that wants to dig deeper into a particular goal?
Junior's asking a question, but I think you're going to cover it, right? Are there any recommended metrics used for measuring impact?
So that's actually very, very interesting, because I would say, and I say this to ventures a lot, there is no one way of measuring impact. And it really goes back to what impact are you attempting to measure, and looking at best practices around that measurement. So as an example, I'll talk a little bit about my venture. So I run a social enterprise called City, and it's about creating employment opportunities and reducing inequalities through gender equality, but obviously working with majority women and the artisans that we work with. We worked on a measurement called Self-Reliance Index. And the Self-Reliance Index was not looking, was measuring whether we were doing well or not based on long-term sustainability and job security with the community that we work with, and whether they achieved self-reliance or financial self-reliance over a spread amount of time, as opposed to by one bar, it creates 2 hours of work and then you're done. It was really looking at long-term impact of how we contribute to the community that we work with. And we've set that as a boundary and a measurement for ourselves, where other enterprises might use different models. They might use models based on hours worked, hours of work generated, or they might use it as, has it had an impact on their mental health potentially, or reducing no poverty in other ways. So I think as a social enterprise, I would ask you, Junior, what are specific indicators that you're looking into, and what are specific goals that you're looking into, and then looking at those indicators, and then based on that, finding a measurement that aligns well both with the community that you work with and the services that you're offering, and also how you can best measure it. Because sometimes it's more difficult for enterprises to be able to measure their impact. It might put a toll on them. You might just need just one person dedicated for measurements, and you might not be able to afford that immediately. And that's why it's going back to saying, don't spread yourself thin by trying to cover so many goals at the same time, but trying to hone in on something super specific, like, okay, we're really focused on this one goal. We might touch on others, but what we're actually measuring are these specific goals and the indicators under these goals.
Okay, thank you so much, Noora. Actually, just to point on to something, I was actually working on a document focusing on water, sanitation, and hygiene. As I mentioned, I manufacture soap. And I was actually writing a proposal for UNDP for a project that they're currently working on, right? And I was doing what you're actually talking against in terms of just bringing in all the SDGs and saying, you know what, I'm working on this project, but it will have a bearing on poverty, on empowerment, on this and that. I actually didn't know about the indicators. So when you were speaking to Fayez about the indicators, I actually noticed where my social enterprise actually fits in terms of women empowerment and the hygiene aspect of it. So thank you very much for that.
I think that's really important. And also, Junior, what I would recommend for you, I opened up another document here, which is actually a report on where things are today. And again, all of this stuff is very accessible online. I wanted to bring this up because there were some specific findings, and speaking particular around water, you know, based on the latest report, 2 billion people lack safely managed drinking water and 3.6 billion people lack safely managed sanitation. So what I would ask you when you're writing a grant report potentially is, this is where the stats are today. This is how my company is coming in to decrease that or create, you know, better improved qualities, and then show potentially on a projected measurement. And again, you can be very clear on projected measurement of how coming in and working on specific goals, you're helping you reduce that number or bring it closer to the goals based on indicators. So and sometimes your measurement can be very community focused. It doesn't have to be, you know, on the global scale, you're reducing water, you know, the impact on water globally. It could be on one particular village that you work with. It could be on, you know, working on a small problem, and then by achieving that maybe small problem, you're able to scale it essentially over time, right?
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. So when you're thinking of a social enterprise, it's also important to ask, you know, your impact opportunity, right? So what is the problem that you're trying to solve? This is something that you have to kind of set aside around, you know, whether, and the problem could also fall along your business. And define that specific problem. Try to kind of go into a little like deeper around what that problem is. How big is that problem? What is the size of that problem? And again, it could be around a particular community. It could be around the entire country. It could be a global issue that is fundamental and critical, that is just, you know, really important for you to try to achieve. And select the scale of which the problem that you aim to make a difference. So again, it goes that, you know, within particular goals, there may only be specific indicators that you're important, that you can achieve. So going back to gender equality, as a company, you can say, well, I don't think I have a part around trafficking and, you know, preventing trafficking of women and sexual exploitation. But what I can do is I can ensure that we give priority to hiring women, or we give legal structures to protecting women in the workforce, you know, with certain goals within a company to do so. So sometimes even within a particular goal, you may not fit every indicator under that goal, and that's okay.
Makes sense though, right? Because you can't solve all the world's problems in one.
And that's why it's important to dive deeper around the indicators and kind of diving into this document, which I shared in the chat, of saying, you know, take a look at, and I'll scroll in, but you can kind of look at this global indicator framework for sustainable development goals and saying, all right, so where are we at in terms of, you know, overarching goals? How can I as a company, or how can we as a company or organization work towards that? And sometimes it takes a little bit of digging and a little bit more research around each one, and it can get exhaustive at the times. Again, hone in on the ones that really trigger you. And I essentially, why did I start with this initial part of my presentation to say, what is it that drives your passion? What is it that you love and that makes you want to get up and work and feel like I want to make a difference in the world? And the reason I start with that is because it's important that as we dig deeper to solve some of the world's biggest problems, you got to love what you do. You got to want it. You got to want, like, there's something inside of you. You're like, you know what? It could be something that you experienced growing up. You grew up in a community that was, severely impacted by lack of clean water. You may know people that, were impacted with chronic diseases as a result of this. And this is a driving force for you to be like, this should be a right, not a privilege. And this is where I come in my company to make sure that we achieve these goals, one product at a time, one service at a time, one whatever it may be that you want to set forth. So it does require a little bit of digging in, and I wish we can really take a deep dive on every single one, but we probably need, hours and hours to dig into each and every indicator. But it's a good kind of pathway to start. I'll go back to sharing my presentation. Hold on. Okay. Can you guys see my screen, my presentation again? Okay. So with that in mind, I would want to ask you, especially and I'm sure some of you, whether students or those that are running their own enterprises, is ask yourself, how can you then essentially become a triple bottom line company? And what does a triple bottom line company mean? Is that you're really looking at considering the social, environmental, and economic impacts of your work, including your employer, your network of clients, and your supplier. And so when we run the course of business, it's not just, I'm sourcing from a good manufacturer, I'm good. It's really looking at the whole ecosystem of your business to see how your day in and day out. It could be procuring practices, it could be the people that you do business with, it could be the land in which we do business in. So for example, here we do, I live in Mississauga, so we acknowledge the land that we are doing business in. It's the partnerships that we create, and it's the messaging that we are pushing forward. So it really touches on multiple different factors, and it really doesn't stop into one element. So I would ask you then to think of what is something that you think is really what differentiates a triple bottom line company to say a non-triple bottom line company. Can you guys think of any? No?
Can you kind of say that question again?
So what will make a company just, because usually when you're thinking of company, it's usually around, it's all about your shareholders. It's how much I can put in the profit, like the profit with my shareholders at the end of the day. How much money can I get my shareholders by the end of the year? And usually that metric is really about minimizing your expenses, maximizing your profit, and that's all that really is at the forefront, right? So the idea is sometimes as a triple bottom line company, you have to make business decisions that are not just about maximizing profit, but really looks at other elements that impact you. So for example, I could have an opportunity. I want to make tote bags. Okay, so I want to launch a new tote bag line of my company, and I have an opportunity to source tote bags at 20 cents a bag, made at some sweatshop in Bangladesh. I don't know the treatment of their people. I don't know how they source the fabric. I don't know the impact of the environment. I just want to source tote bags at the cheapest rate I can, and I'm going to sell these tote bags at $20. All right, so I know that I'm going to have a really great multiplying margin selling these 20-cent tote bags that I'm procuring. So what I've done here is, am I considering people? No. Am I considering planets? No. Am I only considering profit? Yes. Does that make me aligned around a triple bottom line sustainable model? Not necessarily, no. But then I can say, all right, I want to run these tote. I still want to run these tote bags. So what's the solution? So the solution would be, okay, looking at the company you're procuring from, asking questions about where you're sourcing, this tote bag. I could be sourcing it from a fair trade organization that employs women fairly. I can work with an organization that also sources their fabrics, in an organic fashion. There's a limited footprint in terms of my environmental impacts getting these tote bags. And essentially the tote bag, instead of costing me 20 cents, they're going to cost me now $6. Oh my gosh, do I want to spend $6 on a tote bag? I'm no longer going to make the margins I was going to make at 20 cents. So I have to ask myself whether I'm aligned closer towards purchasing and procuring a bag where I know that key elements are ticked off. So like, I know that I'm working with a company that is fair trade approved, or I know that they're sourcing things with minimal footprint and sourcing the fabric. And yes, I can still make profit, maybe not at the level of the other company that I could have sourced at, but I'm still able to kind of bring it forward. That's what we mean when we talk about triple bottom line, is really looking at your sustainability as a company, looking at social and economic factors, social environmental factors, eco-efficiency, and how it all kind of comes together when you are bringing something forward. So, and again, it could be the same thing with tech-based, when we're sourcing technology. And I think there's this issue with like certain chips. I think this is happening. There's like a lack in the world right now with sourcing like microchips. Yeah. And the issue is around like sourcing them from these, very vulnerable communities. Are we effectively sourcing, materials to maybe put together, what makes my phone what it is today? Is it being ethically sourced? Is it, are we asking the right questions? Are we protecting the community where we're sourcing the stuff from? And it comes back to you, because some people can turn a blind eye and say, well, we're just sourcing it from a third-party company, no questions asked. And now what's happening is there's a greater force of consumers asking questions. Has this been consciously sourced? And what does that really mean? Right? And it goes back to triple bottom line.
I have a question about this, Noora.
Yeah.
Based on the ventures that I've been working with at Edge, that we've been working with at Edge, it seems like, we talk about the triple bottom line, and there's always this picture like the one there on your screen that has everything in equal balance, but kind of like art and science here, right? Like never 100% perfect on any one of those things.
No, and that's why creating measurements and impact around what you're trying to achieve is important. You can say, and this is why companies set goals of like 2030. That's why sometimes companies are like, well, why can't they just implement it tomorrow? Why can't they just say zero plastic as of tomorrow? Why are they taking 10 years to get to that point? It's because sometimes certain things have to be set in place to change that dynamic to get closer towards the goal that you want to reach. And what does that mean? So
just no one's perfect, really. Yeah.
Also because changing the way we do business can sometimes take time. And finding different resources and different ways that are economically more efficient can sometimes take more time, whether it's developing the technology, sourcing the materials, and trying to operate differently structurally as a company, right? If your company conducted business for years on a particular framework, and now overnight we're setting goals for ourselves, it's really hard to do that shift because you're holding yourself accountable on those goals. And so
it's really
Yeah, but it's really about making sure that companies are asking themselves, are you asking yourself these questions? Are these things that are at the top of the line? And what's next on my list is something called BCorp. And the reason I mentioned BCorp here is because BCorp is essentially the certification. Has everyone heard of BCorp? Does anybody not know what BCorp is? And then I'll touch on it. So BCorp is something you'll often see at the back of a package that will just be like BCorp certified. And what that is, it's a measurement, it's an impact measurement set. It's like a body, an organizational body. It's a global organizational body that will measure your business, whether it's doing business well or not, based on particular metrics set by the B Corporation. And it's really difficult. You have to achieve certain points I think there's like a minimal point that you have to achieve. And by achieving those points, then you would be B Corp certified. It's usually a very exhausting procedure to go through. But the reason companies go through it is because they want to set the standard of how they do business. And because as being part of the B Corp community, they're also speaking very specifically to their target audience to say, these are key lining factors that we adhere to, and we measure ourselves year to year as a result. Being B Corp certified, the interesting is you can go up on the metric and you can go down on the metric. And sometimes what happens with companies that are looking to scale is they'll perform really well in the beginning. And as they scale and as they're growing their production line and they're growing in terms of the revenue, they often get a dip in their point system of how they are impacting, environmental, people economics and how they do business. And the reason that happens is because scaling with positive impact can be difficult, because it means that you have to forfeit, what really matters as a company. Am I still committed to being shareholder or stakeholder? To become B Corp certified, and I know this for Canada, but I'm not 100% for the US. In Canada, to become B Corp certified, you actually have to change your articles of incorporation as a company to be stakeholder focused and not shareholder focused. And what that means is, as you grow and you scale and you bring in investors in the future, your investor can't come in and be like, I don't care about the environment. I want you to bring me the best buck at the end of the day. But if you're B Corp certified, and if your articles of incorporation within the very legal foundations of your company have been set to be stakeholder focused, your investors can't kind of come in and put their foot down, because the very foundation and structure of your company is set to serve your ultimate stakeholders. And those stakeholders could be refugee and displaced communities. It could be marginalized, it could be protecting the environment and things related around that. And so it's really interesting to look at how different companies run different models, because all of these are very different. They have different goals that they set for themselves, but they also set different goals about measuring how they're achieving their specific goals around each company, right?
I find it interesting that as they scale it can get out of balance, but that would be normal, right? As things shift, there would be some difficulty to balance things properly.
I think because it's a little more difficult to measure larger scale impact, not just vertically, but horizontally.
Or it could be that they're in a different risk period in their venture.
So for B Corp certificates, B Corp companies, it doesn't just measure around the product that the product and mission of the company, but it also measures your employability, how you treat your staff, how you're working with, your day-to-day operational aspect, not just on you achieving SDG goals. You could be a company that's achieving SDG goals and working on positive impact, but you may have horrible employer standards that are overworking your staff and doing things that may not align necessarily on the full scope of running a company. And that's why the point system with B Corp is really not just looking at one element of a goal that you're trying to achieve, but really looking at how you're conducting your business as a whole. Because we could be working towards, we've eliminated plastic. That's our goal. And we've worked towards that goal and we're really good at it. But you could be faulting on other parts of the business. You could be faulting on other parts of, providing safe and a safe place for your employees to work. Maybe there's hazardous things in place. Maybe you're not providing proper training for your employees. That could be resulting in potential accidents at work because you didn't look at safety precautions as a priority, for example. So these are things that may not necessarily align with me reducing inequalities, but it also looks at the running of a business and how that really aligns, and holding ourselves accountable. Because you're like, why would a company do that? Why would I put myself on the forefront or in public to show people how I do business? Because at the end of the day, when we create more trust around how we are and the greater transparency as a company, it creates better trust with your consumers, with the people you do business with all the time. And people, and I, like as a social enterprise, I know with City, we work with other retailers that also set standards on, we will only do business with vendors that follow ABC standards. And if I don't fall under those criteria, they might not do business with me. So it's better business for me to align and have better practices, because it promotes better working relationships with other companies that are also aligned around, you know, doing well in business around those standards.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So
I mean, in a way, it's just good business too, though. Like, so I mean, I understand when you're talking really large corporate, but for smaller companies, it's just good business, period.
but then you could ask
Easier
yourself,
to attract good people, easier to integrate better with the community. It's, I mean, there's so many different reasons why you would want to operate in this way.
for sure. But sometimes we think of large companies, you know, like the Nestle's, the Coca-Colas, you know, the P&G companies that are there, and you ask, okay, why are they not aligned? What kind of questions do we have to ask ourselves? And you look at other companies that are aligned, and you kind of look at a comparative. And sometimes it comes down to the economics of things. It's just better business practices. It puts more money in the shareholders' pockets. You know, it may not align necessarily, because at the end of the day, it costs more money to do good sometimes. It costs more money to source well. It costs more money to pay your employees better rates, to offer maybe health support to your employees, etc. And that has to align, whether that's something that really is at the key of what you are trying to achieve as a company, and whether it aligns with, you know, your mission, not just as a core statement.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I wasn't at all arguing the point. I was just sort of thinking out loud.
So one thing I do also want to touch on quickly is around this idea of CSR. And the reason I want to touch on CSR is a lot of people confuse CSR or corporate social responsibility with their business doing good. And what does that mean? So sometimes, for example, I walked into a car dealership the other day, and I noticed they had this thing as soon as you walked in, where they donate X amount of dollars to what was it? It was like a dog humanitarian shelter that they support. And it's something that this particular car dealership was really keen on. They loved animals and they wanted to give back, and they were raising a goal of like $1,000, I don't know how many dollars they were raising towards this particular dog shelter that they were supporting. Would you say that this is a key part of them setting a goal for themselves, or would you say that this is part of a CSR strategy?
CSR strategy?
Yeah. So
Okay.
it looks good. I mean, wow, you know, this car dealership loves animals and I love animals. And so I feel good inside that they're doing something good and they're not just taking all my money and putting it somewhere. But what happens sometimes with CSRs is they're just one-off programs. They're not embedded in the very structure and operation of the company. And CSRs became very popular when a lot of the corporations were kind of being asked, what are you doing to really, you're making millions and millions of profit. How are you really impacting the community positively? And then soon you saw a lot of organizations or companies that would come out and say, we're making a big flat donation towards X amount of community, and that's it. But what happens with corporate social responsibility, it's usually where, you know, a company could be aligned with something specific. They make one-off donations, but then they continue to run their business normally. They're not changing anything in the foundation of their company. They're not changing anything in terms of the structures of how they do business. They're just doing these one-off programs. They might throw some cash. It looks good. It's good PR. It's good marketing. You feel good inside that, oh, you know, they just donated some money to a shelter. All right, they must be a fantastic company. But sometimes what happens is that it's just that. It's just they feel it's a sense of corporate responsibility. It touches on, something that people might care about, but there's no, if you see here, it's a market responsibility. There's no legal compliance, whether they're really following up on certain key points, right? There isn't this sense where they're going to give money to the shelter, but are they looking at key fundamentals of like how animal treatment is? Are they diving deeper into the structures of supporting certain issues around animal welfare? No, because all they care about is raising money. They're donating it, they're done. That relationship of them doing business around a particular give back is just that, it's transactional. It's not embedded in the very structure of the company. So I would challenge you when you're thinking of certain programs within your company to ask, is this something that is CSR related? Or is this something that is at the very foundation and structure of my business? So
so there's no judgment in that, right? Like if somebody chooses to just give from the profits, that's a CSR program. If they want to go deeper.
But you can't confuse CSR program to becoming a social enterprise. So what happens sometimes is people will say, I'm a social enterprise, I give back to this community. I would challenge them and say, is this part of your business, or are you just giving back and you're done? Is it part where like at the end of the year, we made some good profit. All right, I'm going to make a one-time donation. And then for next year, I'm going to continue to do business normally.
100%.
So I think
it's why sorry, I'm interrupting you, but
no, go ahead.
It's why at Edge we've really started to differentiate between purpose-led companies and social enterprises, meaning you can be very purpose-driven and contribute from your company to your community or in whatever way you want. But if you're really going to go toward a triple bottom line, that is more of a social enterprise.
So does that mean that a social enterprise can't also participate in CSR?
100%.
They
could, right?
They could, right? Because I could, like Fayez could be working with a particular community towards water inequality, but then can also make a one-time donation towards something else that they believe in, right? Or something that can come up. And this happens often where, it could be a pandemic happens and suddenly he feels like, oh, maybe accessibility to safe water and donating, I don't know, masks to a community can help, and that they do a one-time donation. Does that take away from him running a social enterprise? Not necessarily, but does it align towards him achieving his SDG goals? No. So there's a difference between doing these one-off feel-good type of programming that could just be good in general, or working towards certain goals and indicators as a company and being able to measure those goals. Right? Let's see if there's any questions. Okay. So
there always feels like a little bit of judgment in this, though, like as if the people running social enterprises are better people than the people who are just running a purpose-led business, or the companies that are for profit but just contributing on a CSR basis. Like, are we saying some people are better than other people?
I think it's setting the standards of how people do business. And sometimes, I know a ton of businesses that just do business for the sake of doing business. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think the challenge here and what we're trying to pose is, can you do business and do well? Can you run a business and run a profit, but also contribute positively to the global community that you live in? And if the answer is yes, then it's why not?
But if you're employing thousands of people, then you're contributing too.
Yeah, and that could be part of your core of, what? We are a large enterprise, and if my factory was to close tomorrow, it's going to impact thousands and thousands of jobs.
Right.
That's how I measure my impact towards fair and equitable hiring standards.
And making sure that they're putting those standards in place. Yeah, that's where the UN SDGs really come in.
But then I would also say, and this is interesting because we came across a particular era in the US and Canada where a lot of companies where is it called offboarding? Like they were offshoring. So they were sending all of their employment overseas because it just made more money sense. So, and thousands of people were losing jobs in North America because jobs were going to, you know, global countries abroad. And you can think of, you know, car companies across the United States that experienced this, where hundreds and thousands of families lost jobs because those companies, it made more financial sense to do business abroad. But then it also had negative implications, you know, on the forefront. The goal was to maximize profit by doing business abroad. It wasn't about we were generating employment in these countries abroad, right? And so sometimes it's measuring the actions of a company and asking whether it aligns well, or are they doing something towards helping them? You could put Amazon on, you know, on the stand and say, well, you know, they're creating tons and tons of jobs. But then I would dig deeper and say, okay, so are they treating their employees fairly? Are they on a contract basis? Is there protection for these employees? Are the standards of working well? Are they overworking them?
Mhm.
You know, are there certain things in place? Like, so just because a company is generating a ton of jobs in a community, and sometimes what happens is the government incentivizes these large companies to come in and set up shop in our cities. We have to ask, and I think this is where provincial and policymakers play a role of ensuring, sure, you can do business in the city, but you have to make sure that your standards of operations are up to par to what we want to reach as a company. And I want, there's one.
I'm just playing the other side, Noora. I agree
No,
with you,
no,
by the way.
no, thank you. Please do.
Obviously, I agree with you, but yeah. Any questions at this point? Sorry, I'm throwing things in, but this is really your meeting, so ask your questions of Noora.
Not really a question, but it's kind of like taking the UN SDG and in my head, what I'm kind of, the words that I've kind of put together for, you know, building the social enterprise is actually the doing part. The CSR is kind of just the giving part, realistically. Like, it's just doing something that's a one-time thing, or maybe multiple times in a year, but it still unfortunately does not align with the core fundamental business operation. Just because the business has scaled and, you know, it's huge now, for example, just because there's more opportunity for employees, just because there's more consumers, just because there's more customers, all of those things are now sacrificed at the altar of actually like making sure those things are those operations are actually functioning in line with the Sustainable Development Goals, right? Is that what I'm getting at?
I feel like I want you to go in specifics so I can answer that.
Um,
Sorry,
I just wanted to like make sure like I'm just like going along the same lines, like essentially like building the social enterprises, taking every single operation of the business, right? Whether it's human resources, whether it's just labor, whether it's just actually outsourcing a product if you're a product company, and making sure all of those things are in line with the Sustainable Development Goals, or the, you know, the niche within the SDGs, right?
yes. I think it's important that you look at a holistic aspect.
Holistic, yeah.
Where it's not just, you know, just the product and service that you're bringing to the table, but really aligning on, you know, at the core and operating factor of your business. Now, you could have one element of your business that just focuses on one thing, and that's okay. And you could have programming where you give one-off donations from time to time. Now, you have to ask yourself, is that aligned within the very structures of our mission? Like, does it come back to answer our mission effectively? And if it does, then it could be part of your core. It could be that your one-off programming donations could contribute towards, you know, certain SDG goals. It could be, but you have to ask yourself, is if it is one-off, what does that look like? And how it goes through. Yes, I would. Junior touches on a point. CSR really comes across as window dressing for most entities. Sometimes it starts as that, and then it builds towards something more concrete. Sometimes companies will start out with CSR programming, And then they will grow into something more effective that align with how they do business and how they want to incorporate structures. And it can sometimes feel scary for an enterprise to set goals for themselves that they can't either measure or they're working backwards on. The last thing you want to do is set goals, but you're actually negatively impacting those goals as opposed to doing better, right? I did want to share another stat, especially for those joining from Canada. Sometimes it's important to see from a policy perspective or even from a governmental perspective, where are we at when it comes to, you know, our country and where are we at in terms of how those goals are achieved. So even from like clean water and sanitation, I'm going to click this, and these are indicators that the Canadian government is working towards. And you can see, all right, so the reference point is here, the latest data, it really goes towards current data and the measurements provided, whether we are as a country working towards those or not. So it's sometimes you can see that here, you can tell that there's no measurement point of 6.2. So achieve access to adequate, equitable sanitation and hygiene for all and end open defecation, paying special attention to the needs of women and girls and those vulnerable situations. And you can see that there's no points of measurement, which is actually like surprising. So sometimes it's also holding our governments accountable to where, you know, on a large scale, you know, achieving goals, where are we at? And it's important to look at that because sometimes there are measurements in place or federal or provincial programming in place to help achieve some of these goals that could also align with your business and how you run your business. There's also something called Impact Canada, and I don't have the link up here, but I will try to access it. I will share this also in the chat. But Impact Canada is also a great one because it looks at impact programs within the Canadian government that they're looking to either fund or support in the near future. And it could align well with your business if you're in Canada to see whether this is something that you want to learn more about. And I think it's important because sometimes you want to dive deeper around the statistics of the community that you work with. So if you're in, you know, if you're working in Jordan, in Egypt, in Pakistan, and, you know, wherever it may be, you want to dig deeper around where are those goals. Thank you so much for sharing that. Maybe I can open it. Can I open it?
Mm-hmm. You should.
Can you see it? Or
no,
you can't see my screen. I'm sorry, I apologize. Let me try to open that here. No, did it not do anything? Sorry, I apologize. It didn't share. Okay, I will try to share it again. It's not okay. That's fine.
You just need to copy the link. I think you're only grabbing one of the words.
Okay, here we go.
There it goes.
So this is also something where it goes a little deeper around Canada working towards solving some of the world's biggest problems and certain programming that they've set in place. And again, this could align well with students or businesses that are doing business in Canada and looking at like, all right, where are, you know, this is, for example, this is a program around eliminating plastic. And so you can see maybe that aligns with your business and that's something that you want to work towards. So sometimes it's important to see, this is where the partnership part comes into play, where as a business, you could be partnering with existing programming that is set in place that could help you achieve your goals faster. And that's why it's important to really not look at the, you know, just a local lens or a global lens, but also a national lens of where you do business and how that can feed in to helping you achieve some of the goals that you're setting for yourselves. Right? So I hope this was helpful.
So helpful.
And I don't know
Amazing.
if there are any maybe further questions. I will stop sharing right now. And kind of maybe open it up a little bit more around certain questions or confusions around SDGs. I know getting started is the hardest point, or setting a goal for yourself sometimes is hard. But what I would challenge is say, look at something that drives your passion, kind of going back to that first step, and then asking, all right, how are we getting closer to help achieve those goals? Sometimes it looks good on paper, but it doesn't make sense for the running of your business. And that's why digging deeper around the indicators can really help do that, where you kind of need to, kind of fall in line and then figure out as a business, all right, so these are the indicators set in place, but then I need to set my own indicators as a company, and how our running of a business can help achieve those fronts, right?
We have 8 minutes left. Any questions? How can we help you as we wrap this up?
Not particularly a question, but I've actually read that book, Ikigai. I actually found that book amazing, and it was helpful. I'm not gonna lie, I was not expecting you to just come in with your first slide and talk about it, but it makes total sense now, like developing a social enterprise. Again, it's like what drives you to wake up in the morning every day. At first, I was like, I want to solve the entire world's problems, but getting down to the nitty gritty, niching down, and then really walking that fine line between CSR or actually whether or not you are an actual social enterprise. It's something that has really opened my eyes. So yeah, thank you so much for that.
Junior, any questions? You've come in a long way, from a long ways away.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much, guys, for this amazing presentation. Noora, I wanted to ask, if I am to apply for funding, right, how best do I align the goals in relation to the funding? So what happened is last year, I think it was in fact, it was 2020, I got funding from UNDP for COVID prevention and response, right? But I think also this opened up my mind in terms of how funding can really help my business grow. So now I'm just in a position where I'm trying to look for more opportunities and how I can really position my business in terms my social enterprise in terms of aligning it to UN SDGs and also impact from my community. How do I align the two to get more funding?
I would ask you to dive deeper around, I would ask you to dive deeper around the funding that is available and see what are they focusing on to fund and how that aligns with how you are looking to do business, right? So for example, if it's specific around clean water, I would want to see, because even within the goal itself, they'll within the grant itself, they might indicate certain things that they're looking for the other party to achieve, and you have to see whether that aligns with your business and how you're able to achieve or come closer towards that goal. Sometimes what happens and what may be to a negative aspect is you come in with just telling them your business and not necessarily showing how your business is working towards the goal that UNDP is trying to achieve in maybe a core community or country. And you can come in and say, all right, this is my business, but this is a goal that is being achieved with the grant. And this is how we can build a project around this grant funding that is going to be, let's say, received by UNDP. And then that's how we will run business using the funding available towards, basically these are the goals we're working towards with the funding that is attained. Because you can say by getting this money, you're able to do this. So you have to show that equation clearly to them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Stephanie, you're good. Betty, you came in sort of last minute. Is there anything that's come to mind for you?
Yeah, I did. I was on the road and I was trying to get in on my iPhone and I couldn't. Anyways, I'm now at home. I'm just, and I missed part of the opening, Noora, is that?
Yeah.
Noora. Yeah. And so I'm thinking about my own business and funding and how it helps the greater good or Canada as a whole. It's how do I access that funding and prove that what I'm doing will help the greater good?
So do you run a nonprofit or social enterprise?
No, it's a social enterprise, yes. It was I came in to Rise as a not-for-profit, but I switched it and it's just a social enterprise.
Okay, so accessibility to funding can sometimes be difficult because as a social enterprise, you also don't want to depend and this is kind of a different topic a little bit, but you have to create a revenue model that is not dependent on grants. It could benefit from grants, but is not dependent on it. And that's very different sometimes between a nonprofit and a social enterprise, where you have to have a way to have maybe an omni-channel of how you do business, how you bring in money to your company. And grants could supplement your ability to do good faster.
Yeah.
Because it's helping you achieve particular goals. So it could be working with Indigenous communities, or it could be, employing women or employing different practices that help you achieve your goals more effectively, maybe at a local, and not just on a local level, but also on a national level. What I would advise you is look at available resources like Impact Canada and look at things aligned around your goals as a social enterprise to see, okay, where do I fit in? So what do I mean by that? For example, you are really interested around supporting women and inequalities around women in particular, for example, and it could be anything else. I'm just bringing women as an example. And what I would do is I would look at organizations already serving these populations and available funding that could come out of them. And what happens sometimes is, although the Canadian government, and I'm specifically talking about Canada, but although the Canadian government might not have direct funds for businesses to apply for, what sometimes happens is money is allocated to larger foundations or larger organizations that also run this on a day-to-day, as part of their main mission. But those organizations will then trickle down those funds to other organizations like yourselves. So for example, the Canadian Women's Foundation is a good example, where they will receive government funding and then they will reallocate those funds to different enterprises, potentially like yours, that could fit within the model of your social enterprise and some of the programming that you do. So I would ask you to dive deeper around the programs that you or the services or whatever it is that you're bringing to the table, and then look at existing players in the field. It's always good, not just from a competitive analysis, but also looking at what other partners are at stake here, what other stakeholders are also involved around the beneficiaries that you're targeting, and then see how you align well with them.
Sorry, we froze there for a minute. And
sorry, was that me? Did I freeze?
I don't know. No, my internet's just saying it's unstable. So
where did you catch me last?
I was asking a question. I was.
Did you not hear anything I said?
Yeah. So I know time's limited, so I would explain a little bit more where my head's at, and my business, but time's limited. So I think
did record it. So, and it did come through, so you'll get it.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I mean, if you want to ask something maybe more specific, like a more specific question around your social enterprise, I'm happy to.
Maybe you could stay on after and talk to Betty if you have a minute.
I'm happy to stay a few
Why
minutes.
Why don't I release everybody? We'll call this a wrap. So just thank you very much, Noora, for being here, for deep diving on how we can integrate the UN SDGs. And geez, we need to have you come back because this was just so good. I have so many more questions, so I'm very keen to have you back because this is my chance to get all my questions answered too.
And I'm sorry, I thought this was an hour and a half, but I guess not.
It is. It just started early this week.
Started at 4.
Oh,
yeah.
It did. Oh my.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
No
Sorry.
worries.
Okay.
Thank you for being here, everybody. I'm just gonna wrap up. We'll hold on for you, Betty. And Junior, to your question, we do post all of these Mentor Monday sessions. The recordings are posted on our YouTube channel. So if you want to reach out to me, I can send you a link to that because I don't just have it handy. I'm just putting my email address in the chat here. There you go. So you can reach out to me, Junior. And thanks for being here all the way from Zimbabwe. And thanks to all of you for being here. I'm going to just wrap it up, and thanks to Noora for doing this.
Thank you so much. I've included my LinkedIn if anybody wants to connect. I'm happy to chat on the side if you guys need, just for a quick chat if you'd like. As well, I do advise you, if you have not already, to check out, the EDGE community and see how you can be involved in that on a more basis. I am a mentor with EDGE, and so if you are part of that community, definitely book a call with me, and then I'm happy to dive deeper on your business.
Thanks, Noora. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
You
Okay,
too.
bye.
Betty, if you want to stay on, we'll